SZA is one of the biggest pop stars alive. Her album SOS was the longest running #1 female album of the decade, the first R&B album to spend 7 weeks straight at the top of the charts since Whitney Houston back in 1987.
Her album SOS has spent 10 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Top 200.
The song Kill Bill became the longest running #1 song on the hip hop charts by any female artist ever. Basically, with 400 million streams in its first week, SOS made her one of the most streamed artists in the world. And with the deluxe, it's basically an entire sequel album dropping 2 years later and topping the charts again, she's still relevant. In today's world where artists have to constantly stay on the content treadmill to survive, her rare appearances and general reluctance to play the game, combined with her crazy success, make her that much more special. And when you look at her peers, there's almost no one else doing it the way she does. She's only dropped 2 albums in her more than 10-year recording career, but despite that lack of output, she's become one of the most influential and successful R&B artists of her generation. She sits at the very rare place where quality and popularity meet, making songs that can get billions of streams, making her the 12th most listened to artist in the world, while also dropping albums that are completely unique and memorable. She's one of the few artists who can go against the grain and be a reclusive, slow-working visionary while also being super popular. But SZA's story herself is just as unique as her position in the industry, because the path she took to become such a huge star is unlike almost any other artist's origin story. Becoming the face of R&B after never listening to music at all until she was an adult, let alone being trained as a musician from a young age, only makes her story that much more insane.
Singing was more like an accident, which is probably why it worked out the way it did, because I didn't try.
So how did SZA become the artist she is today? Who really is she, and what makes her music so great? This is the story of SZA. If you're interested in more of my creations, my brand Spirit World just launched 2 new necklaces, Chaos and Harmony. Every necklace is solid silver with hand-painted enamel, and they're the craziest designs we've put out yet. The brand directly supports Volksgeist, it's all designed by me. I made these necklaces to be a reminder that whatever your goal is, the only way to reach it is to just keep going. Persistence and belief is the key to success, and there's no harmony without chaos first. If you want to support my work and pick up a necklace, you can scan the QR code on screen or go to spiritworld.store to see all the pieces we have for sale. Plus, shipping is free in the US forever. SZA's childhood and early life just doesn't match what most people think of when they imagine the origin story of a superstar. Because before any of her early mixtapes, before Ctrl, before SOS and Lana, all of those crazy hits, she was raised in a pretty unique family. Not long after she was born in St. Louis, Missouri in November of 1989, SZA's parents moved the family to Maplewood, New Jersey, a nearby suburb of New York that's known for a quiet yet diverse community and being one of the more expensive upscale suburbs in the area, with beautiful old homes and a small town feel. With a high average household income and home values often going past the $1 million mark, Maplewood is known by many as a great place to live if you want to raise your kids in a peaceful suburban environment with good schools, while you commute to a high-paying corporate job in Manhattan.
And then all the kids in my school, like, went to Ivy League schools and have all these great lives and do all this cool shit, because if you look at like Columbia High School, all the kids are really like, they be doing shit with their life.
And both of SZA's parents fit that mold. Her dad, Abdul Mubarak Rowe, worked as an editor and producer at CNN for 30 years, filming and editing news broadcasts for a living. And her mother's career was a whole other story as well. Audrey Rowe was a district manager at AT&T, developing products and services at a high level. She traveled for work often, with SZA later saying that she was never home and spoke multiple languages so she could manage clients in countries from Asia to Europe and beyond.
Moved to Maplewood, New Jersey, actually with my husband who is Muslim. I happen to be Christian. Living in New Jersey is an interesting experience in and of itself. Many people don't realize that New Jersey is the 6th most segregated state in the United States.
But in SZA's later interviews, she talked a lot about how her family living in the small suburb of Maplewood sometimes made her feel like an outsider, or the token black kid at her majority Jewish white school. But that wasn't the only reason she felt different growing up. Because being high-achieving, focused corporate career people is where SZA's parents' similarities ended. SZA later said, "My parents are really conservative. They're very aristocratic in the most quaint suburban way. My mom is the most conservative woman you've ever met, but my dad is Muslim." Because SZA's mother is Christian, they did practice some elements of both religions at home, like celebrating Christmas with Christmas trees and gifts, but overall, the family decided to raise their daughter with strict Islamic values. And SZA's mom even made the choice to attend mosque for prayers to keep everyone together. Another big part of her childhood as a Muslim was her father's rules for consuming media. He didn't allow television or radio radio in the house, and for music, he only ever exposed her to older jazz artists like Miles Davis or John Coltrane, but never anything contemporary or with lyrics, stuff that many Muslims would consider haram. And SZA has talked many times over the years about her conflicting feelings on the unique way her parents raised her. She kept a very modest clothing style in public and wore the hijab until the age of 12, but she ended up taking it off shortly after the 9/11 attacks when she started experiencing Islamophobic bullying, with many kids calling her Arabian Nights and other worse names.
Is it true you stopped wearing your hijab after 9/11?
That is semi-true. I don't know, when 9/11 happened, it was just like, it became a thing and I didn't know it was a thing. Like, kids were very like...
Cruel, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they were very sure about the way that they felt about me. Kids being kids paired with fear and ignorance, and like, that was a very traumatizing thing that happened to all of us. Like,
while she later went back to wearing the hijab in high school, it wasn't quite the same again, and people only continued making judgmental comments no matter what decision she had made. She later said, "I regret so much being afraid or caring what people said about me. Or in high school, feeling like if I didn't cover my hair all the time, that I couldn't cover some of the time." She also said, "I did start covering again in high school, and then people said, 'What is this? You don't live your life properly. You're not really Muslim.' I always let someone dictate how I was." She even said in one interview that her classmates called her Arabian Nights as a mean joke, and it even got in her head to the point where she felt like walking away from who she really was to avoid conflict. SZA went on to recall how incidents like someone throwing a brick at her dad's mosque or her getting chased home by kids at school and getting her hijab snatched also colored her mindset, calling the threat of imminent danger based on other people's assumptions very intense. But she also added that she didn't really care thanks to her dad, who instilled within her that it was okay to wear baggy clothes and overalls and be herself. Not to mention that he was cool as hell and Muslim. To this day, she still identifies as Muslim, maintaining a strong connection to the faith and even sometimes wears her hijab during overseas shows in Muslim countries. She's also spoken many times about the beauty of Islamic culture and religion, and how despite the pressure from the outside world, it's something she'll never leave behind. She also said, "All the pillars of Islam and the belief in one God, I think those are ideas that will never leave me. They make sense in my spirit. I connect with God. It's always made sense to me." And ultimately, SZA didn't let the fear and adversity from this time in her life define her path. Instead, her journey as an artist tells the opposite story. Being an outsider didn't push her down. Instead, it guided her to grow into a unique outsider musical sound and style that made her the big legendary artist she is now. She also said, "My mom didn't let me eat sugar or candy till I was older. She didn't let me perm my hair till I was old as fuck, and I begged her to. But my mom is a Pan-Africanist." The interviewer asked, "So wait, they weren't that strict?" SZA laughed and said, "No, they were strict. I just didn't care. I made it very difficult for them." After high school, SZA enrolled at an East Coast university to study marine biology. But instead of going on to become a dolphin researcher, it was there that the slow, unlikely, and confusing journey towards becoming SZA began. SZA described her time in college like this: "I drank Malibu and smoked weed every day and slept." It wasn't a situation where she was growing as a person. Despite making it pretty far into a marine biology degree, she eventually dropped out, moved home to her parents' house, and started bartending at strip clubs around New Jersey. All in all, she described this time in her life as a period of being lost and confused. She's later talked about how stupid it was to walk away from school and how much stress it put on her family, saying, "I really disrespected my parents for a long time. Me telling my mom I would rather go run in the streets and bartend at a strip club than go to school was pretty crazy." The story goes that eventually her mother even told her that she had to move out of the house if she wasn't going to stay in school, which pretty quickly led to an even worse situation. She said, "When I wouldn't go do the college thing they wanted, my mom kind of insinuated that I had to get out. And so I started staying on people's couches and vibing aimlessly, and that sent me into a crazy depression." In 2023, many years later, SZA's mother said this: "I wish I knew then what I know now about listening to what your child has a passion for and supporting that. It's hard to follow your own dreams," she said. "Many of us abandon it very young, especially if the people that we respect and love think we should be doing something different. I'm very glad that ultimately she didn't listen to me." But SZA also later said that she was grateful that her parents pushed her so hard. She said, "I would have melted my soul if left to my own devices. For people that lack boundaries and struggle with self-control, it's paramount to have that influence from your parents. I was that child." Because it turns out that this kind of lost moment in her life, after years of working on school then leaving it all behind with no plan, and her refusal to give up, would become the greatest thing to happen to her yet. But again, SZA never knew for the longest time that music is what she really wanted to do. Although it may have taken a while for her to realize that it was her calling, it still ended up being inevitable in the end anyway. In 2023, during the peak of SZA's popularity, years after this time in her life, the New York Times wrote that SZA resists some of the terms and conditions of being a superstar. There are a lot of things that person's probably referencing, but to me, it goes right back to her early music. Even when she first started writing and singing songs, she was on a completely different creative wavelength than anyone around her. A lot of that comes from her unique life. Unlike many of her peers, she wasn't raised to be a star or an entertainer or even a musician. Instead, she was a kid listening to Bjork and Red Hot Chili Peppers on a broken iPod that she wasn't supposed to have. That isn't what most people think of when they imagine future star. But for an artist like her, it was actually the necessary ingredient to set her apart.
Some people choose music as a career and they feel very certain about what they're doing and like why they're doing it. But I was never quite certain. So when I started trying to make music, it was like this thing that I didn't have to try at, that I was like randomly good at.
Because again, you don't hear stories of SZA loving singing or writing as a kid or a teenager or even a young adult. She definitely wasn't singing in a choir when she was young or taking private music lessons like many people who become pop singers later on in life do. And again, that's because of her Muslim upbringing. Like we discussed, she didn't hear much music at all as a kid, saying to Complex that the only music she heard at home was artists like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, some of the most legendary jazz artists ever. But still, just a handful of instrumental albums once in a while, it doesn't turn you into a star. Unless, of course, you were born to be one. The story goes that the first time SZA ever heard any non-jazz music was listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers at a birthday party when she was a kid. In a similar way, she tells stories about finding a lost iPod at a gymnastics camp when she was a kid, with the iPod containing Bjork, Wu-Tang Clan, Jay-Z, and Nas, and her falling in love with that music even though the iPod was broken and she couldn't even see what was on the screen. But the thing is, that friction, the fact that it was something that was kind of special or even forbidden, made music so much more special to her. Because it wasn't something she had unlimited access to. It wasn't a regular part of her life. And so because of that, it became something she was immediately drawn to more than anything else. And so it makes sense that music being forbidden for her as a kid set her up to develop an even bigger passion for it that would end up taking her career to unprecedented heights. Eventually, SZA was introduced to making music for the first time by accident in 2011 at the age of 22, when her older brother asked her to sing some notes for a rap song he was making at home. SZA later said that when she first listened back to the first song she ever made, she didn't think it was bad at all, but later on listened again and realized it was pretty terrible. Now, this song is not easy to find online. I'm guessing SZA and her team do a lot of work to get all the copies taken down, but it is possible. There are re-uploads on YouTube, but for the most part, they only have a few thousand plays. That's a very small percentage of SZA's fan base who have ever heard this, considering she currently has 80 million monthly listeners on Spotify. And again, I did realize while I was looking for these demos that SZA and her team do definitely take them down from most places. Reddit posts, SoundCloud links, those have all been removed, but it is possible to find it. But I don't want to put something out there that's supposed to be hidden, so I'm not going to play these demos in the video, but you can go find them for yourself. There are 2 demos out there on the internet that SZA made with her brother called If I Had a Soldier and Where Do We Go, and these were again recorded in 2011, a year before her first EP. Literally, these are her first songs ever, and her voice was still really good. She has later said that she hates these songs, but to me, they sound great. I mean, the song itself is pretty bad. It sounds pretty old and shitty and like it was done at home, but her voice was basically already what it is today. And so right around the age of 21 or 22, just when she had dropped out of college and was working different jobs and staying on different people's couches, not feeling good about her life, SZA also happened to discover her passion for music at the same time and decided to make her own mixtape. It ended up being about 20 minutes long and was called See SZA Run. She dropped it in 2012 on YouTube, but to this day, this EP mixtape thing is not on Spotify or any other official platform, mainly because she made it with the help of a friend and they got all of the beats by downloading them off the internet without permission. But truthfully, See SZA Run is pretty interesting. Even though she called it basically an experimental accident made without any plan, and it had no real release or marketing behind it, it's become this cult classic over time that her hardcore fans recognize as a great mixtape. Even though it barely has 100,000 plays on YouTube compared to the hundreds of millions on her modern songs, it's still something that anyone who likes SZA should listen to. The song Crack Dreams has this enchanting, fascinating sound that sounds like something out of a completely different world.
I'm just a unicorn, come catch me, strap me in chains until I bleed.
And a big reason for that feeling throughout the project is that SZA's early inspirations aren't the artists who she would later go on to compete with. The thing about SZA's early music is that it was just really different, to put it lightly. It wasn't even really R&B like she makes now. Honestly, I would call it more experimental pop than anything else. Back in the day, her very diverse musical inspirations were super obvious. From the bleeping soundscapes on Crack Dreams to the avant-garde sound of Time Travel Undone, a lot of people called early SZA a cross between Bjork and Beyonce, referencing how she had those beautiful, big vocals and a unique, untraditional production style that you wouldn't expect from someone with such a radio-ready voice. The song Country is a beautifully written track with giant imagery of nature and a story about anxiety over this deep oceanic soundscape.
One day I tell the town, lost my mind. One day I left to tell the tale. One day I tell the town, I lost my mind. One day.
It's unlike anything she's made since then, or anything that came out before it. I think the best thing about SZA's early music is that she just couldn't decide on a genre yet. This EP, See SZA Run, is basically experimental without even meaning to be. There are just that many genres jammed into 7 songs. She even played with obscure weird sounds like witch house, chill wave, cloud rap, things that she could never do today, and even different genres that never really went mainstream, but her willingness to play with different ideas on this EP makes it still sound great. A song like Advil is an amazing example of SZA's layered vocals floating on top of the groovy bass, or Euphraxia, where she sings on top of off-kilter movements of grinding bass and icy synths. It was different, but so was SZA. The only question was, is it different enough for SZA to make it, or would she fade away into the background? But the kind of stepping stone or origin story for SZA's eventual massive success was actually an accident, similar to her introduction to music in the first place. Because SZA's boyfriend back in 2011 owned the clothing brand 10 Deep, and they were sponsoring a Kendrick Lamar show around the time Section 80 was released. The boyfriend sent SZA and her friend to deliver some merch as gifts to Kendrick's hotel after the show, and when they got there, her friend started playing SZA's demos really loud on her headphones, which SZA later said made her angry. She's like, "That's not why we're here, we're just supposed to deliver clothes, this is unprofessional and weird." Basically, SZA didn't believe in herself, but her friend literally pushed her music onto Kendrick Lamar's manager, and it turns out he loved it. That was a huge amount of encouragement. Punch was the president of Top Dog Entertainment, and he thought SZA was good enough that he kept checking up on her regularly for the next 2 years as she worked on her See SZA Run and S EPs. And then, within just a few months after dropping those, she was officially signed to Top Dog Entertainment, a quickly growing independent label known for being the home to the next generation of hip-hop lyricists like Kendrick Lamar, Schoolboy Q, Ab Soul, and more. TDE still is, but even back then was associated with quality and talent. But at the time, with SZA having put out just 2 tiny unofficial mixtapes, they had no clue she would go on to become possibly the biggest artist they had ever signed. S has more beautiful songs similar to See SZA Run with great production and angelic vocals, like the song Castles that samples Fleetwood Mac's Everywhere. But S isn't really as finished or professional sounding as SZA's later projects because it does have that edge to it that a big major project couldn't have. So it is really worth listening to if you're a true fan of SZA. My one complaint about the project overall is that I think SZA's producers didn't really understand her yet. Like, a lot of the drums are really slow or sluggish and they didn't suit SZA's vocals all that great. Still though, it is different from SZA's later stuff, and I think a lot of her fans would love to hear it. The song Pray has amazing vocals on top of dreamy synths and drums that feel purple and dark blue. SZA's lyrics are beautifully unreal, and on this song, the mixing is deep and wide. The track Ice Moon has a beat that feels more like Young Lean than anything else, with slow and sluggish icy synths that interrupt the deep rumbling sounds. SZA's lyrics are more melodic than understandable, which later became one of her creative trademarks, and the song Castles has this feeling of shimmering pop with SZA's vocals feeling quiet like the hypnotic sense of a dream pop song by Beach House. However, despite getting signed in 2013, SZA's official actual debut album didn't come out for a ridiculously long 4 years after she first got signed, although that didn't stop her from becoming a promising rising star and gaining experience in the music industry. After joining TDE, she was credited as a writer on a number of songs, including Feeling Myself by Nicki Minaj featuring Beyonce and Consideration from Rihanna's Anti. She performed at countless concerts with her TDE label mates, and Top Dog also got her features on Isaiah Rashad's debut EP and Schoolboy Q's debut album. She also toured as an opener for Jhené Aiko, and in 2014, she released an EP called Z, her first ever official label project made with an actual budget. It debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200, selling 7,000 copies in its first week, which wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't her actual first leap into the mainstream. Either way though, the project Z was a huge step up in quality. Z is SZA's first project that's available on Spotify because it was the first one that was made professionally and with proper actual access to end up on streaming services. With features from other rising artists like Kendrick Lamar and Chance the Rapper and production from Toro y Moi and Mac Miller, it was a big step up musically. Of course, it also helped that Z is just really good. The song Sweet November doesn't just sample, but just takes the instrumental from a rare Marvin Gaye track, creating an authentic vintage atmosphere. The mixing is cold and crisp, and SZA's voice is soulful and smooth, smoother than it's ever been, as she sings lyrics about God and romance.
Heard you fucking with Tommy again. Remember where the landed you last time? That nigga don't really love you, girl. You just bet you every night.
The song Babylon is a really slow song where SZA sings on top of this almost dubstep beat because it was 2014, while the song Julia features a very clean 80s inspired synth-pop instrumental unlike anything she would ever do again. It's dreamy, deeply layered, and captivating. The vocals are thin and wispy, and it doesn't sound much like R&B at all. Honestly, I think SZA's vocals and mixing were so different back in 2014 that you can barely even tell it was her if you put a song like Julia next to something like Good Days. Check it out.
We'll pray for a raincoat to spread the blood and don't mistakes. I know you are feeling like Jericho, feeling like Joe when he lost his shit. Gotta hold my own, my cross too.
I think this era of SZA is pretty clearly criminally underrated. Z is a really special, mellow, slower, quiet album that takes from R&B, soul, art pop, and electronic music all at the same time. It feels like Channel Orange, MGMT, The Weeknd, and FKA Twigs all rolled up into one. But it's not something that SZA ever really would have blown up with and had a #1 album off of, mainly because it doesn't fit easily in any one label. Most of all, with its light, airy, artsy sound, it's really not R&B. When you hear this project, you start to realize that the basis of a lot of SZA's music isn't R&B at all, but instead is indie pop. And she was mainly put into the R&B bucket because of people's expectations based on what she looks like or who she was signed to. But really, her inspirations were a lot more diverse than just that. Overall though, Z is an amazing introduction to SZA as an artist, and it's a really interesting thing to go back and listen to now compared to the music she makes today. That being said, this project is still worth listening to for every SZA fan, just because you do get to see that other, more experimental, out there side to her creativity and style that she doesn't really get to use anymore. The song Warm Winds was this groovy drum beat, and the strings kind of remind me of a modern Beatles song. The track Shattered Ring reminds me heavy of indie rock, and it doesn't feel like R&B at all. The guitars are cold and could be straight out of a 2014 Lana Del Rey track. Even Z's cover art is styled like an indie album, showing this illustration of a fake beer label with all these plants and things. I'm definitely not trying to say this is the perfect project because there are some snoozers, but it was a great album that showed just how creative SZA was at the time and all the potential and talent she had, never just limiting herself to one sound. And of course, in terms of the indie sounds and inspiration, it does feel like a nostalgic time capsule that takes you right back to 2014 in a good way. And even though Z wasn't a mainstream hit, SZA kind of became this underrated star, an artist's artist. In 2015, 2016, she was working with Mac Miller, she was hanging out with members of Odd Future, she was performing with Kendrick Lamar, writing for Rihanna and Beyonce. She might have been just getting started, but everyone who mattered knew who she was. The song Consideration with Rihanna ended up being one of her big breaks early on. Rihanna even featured her on the track and had her perform it with her at the 2016 Brit Awards, all while just having one small project out that barely reached the top 40 of the Billboard 200. At the same time as she was working with so many great artists, she was still so small that articles about SZA had to include a guide on how to pronounce her name because no one knew her back then. One thing is that you can look back through old photos of SZA on stage in 2013 or 14, right around when she got signed, and she just doesn't look like she was even aiming to be a mainstream star. Back when she first came out, she was most often seen on stage in baggy overalls or shorts, big shirts, and Converse sneakers. Not only did her clothes match her sound back then, but when you compare her performances and costumes from back in the day to the production value that she puts on now, it just couldn't be more different, and it shows how far she's come. There's a really early interview where she talks about her appreciation for all kinds of diverse art styles and aesthetics, but either way, it wasn't really that of a chart-topping pop star. It says, "A year ago, New York native SZA was working at Sephora. Today, the 23-year-old singer has solidified her place on the social circuit. Counting Kendrick Lamar, Chance the Rapper, and Toro y Moi among her collaborators, she's also released her first album, Z." When talking about her fashion styles, she said this, "Most of my style inspiration comes from movies. Wes Anderson uses the best Pantone color palette and wardrobe in all of his films, and I would love to dress like a character from Moonrise Kingdom, or perhaps Bill Murray in The Life Aquatic. neurotic. Another quote from this time also connected her early sense of style to her religious background. Even into adulthood, SZA has had doubts when it comes to what she wears, and it stems from her upbringing. As a child, growing up Muslim meant super modest clothing and lots of overalls and bucket hats, but now it's led to her being unsure of wearing something she would have previously worn. One of the really big reasons why SZA was so different from 10 years ago versus now, though, was because she was a completely different artist than she is now. In the mid-2010s, she was known for collaborating with and would often be compared to people in the indie hip-hop or R&B side of the industry, not the hyper-manufactured, big label, carefully curated pop star personalities that she now competes with. But the interesting thing about that is that it's just really rare for an artist to reach the status that SZA has without having been a manufactured label project the entire time. Almost any pop star who gets to that 80 million monthly listener level, longest charting R&B album ever level, they were developed from a young age by family, signed to a label as a teenager, so on and so forth. Like Rihanna, who moved to a new country at 15 years old to pursue her music career, got signed to a major label at 17, and spent her entire life being built up as a star by a massive team of experts. Not to say she doesn't deserve her success, that's just literally the norm. That's what the pop industry is. And she's just one example of many. But it does make SZA much more interesting as someone who's reached an insane level of popularity without having ever even made a song till she was 22 years old. At the start of 2025, she might be one of the most famous female singers alive, but 10 years ago, she wasn't sitting in an executive's office chair getting incubated into a pop star. She was a recent college dropout, making songs in her brother's bedroom, wearing Converse and singing weird indie tunes on tiny stages to tiny crowds. She never even listened to music as a kid. She had no idea she could even make music till after she dropped out of college. And honestly, if that doesn't make SZA's story more motivating and inspiring, I don't know what would. So many pop stars seem like they popped out of nowhere and didn't develop from anything, but SZA, who's now completely surpassing everybody in her lane, started out as someone completely real. But even better, the footprint of her old sound is still in her music now, from the deep cuts to the big hits, because it's genuinely her sound. Even SZA's label couldn't be more organic as far as record companies go. Top Dog Entertainment, which she's been signed to since the beginning, is an independent label, not a mega corporation that has every resource and advantage in the world all the time. But SZA obviously didn't stay where she was at forever. Eventually, she would go on to become a star. We all know that. The only question is, would she keep her diverse sound that mixed R&B with many different ideas, or would she trade that uniqueness away to find success by any means, even if it meant giving up her sound like so many artists do? Well, that wasn't a question for very long, because when her debut album did finally drop, it immediately became one of the most loved R&B albums of a generation. SZA's debut album was originally going to be called A to complete the trilogy she had been working on, and it was originally announced to be released in 2015, not long after the Z EP had dropped. But then it didn't come out that year, and then it didn't come out in 2016 either. Ctrl, as it was eventually named, finally dropped in June 2017, 4 years after SZA was first signed to Top Dog. That's a really long time for a debut album to be in production, especially considering she was a new, unproven artist who needed to capitalize on her hype to keep her career moving forwards. Now, at first, the rumors around the delay were that maybe TDE wasn't supporting SZA, or they were controlling her creativity, or even sabotaging her career, the way that labels have been known to do. But not long after the album finally did come out, SZA opened up and actually said that they kind of saved her from herself, and that if they hadn't taken control, she didn't know when or if she would have finally been ready to put the project out. She had been suffering from so much creative anxiety that she had gotten to a point where she probably wasn't really capable of finishing it in a realistic way. Ctrl came out in June because they cut me off. So who decided it was finished? They just took my hard drive from me. That was all. I just kept fucking everything up. I kept moving shit around. I was choosing from 200 songs, so I'm like, who knows what's good anymore? She doesn't know who took it, just that it was gone from the safe in the studio one day. The interviewer said, so after all that, is this Ctrl necessarily the Ctrl you would have put out? She answered, no, absolutely not. Any longer, and I probably wouldn't have at all. It's up to you whether this means that the label was controlling her creativity or just saving her from herself, but either way, Ctrl ended up being a massive success. SZA instantly went from one of the smaller artists on TDE to one of the most popular R&B singers around. People loved this album, and even though it didn't debut at number 1, critics also adored Ctrl. SZA was becoming more of a cult figure than ever before. Even though it didn't necessarily immediately make her a mainstream star, it put her on the path to become the next best R&B singer of her generation, with the album just continuing to grow and grow over the last 7 or 8 years. At this point today, Ctrl has been charting for 398 weeks straight. It's the second longest charting R&B album by a woman ever. Even though it didn't have the highest sales of the year, it was ranked as the best album of 2017 by basically every single magazine, music blog, and website ever. Vice, Time, Noisy, Pitchfork, Billboard, NPR, New York Times. Even last year, Rolling Stone ranked Ctrl as one of the best albums ever made. Ctrl is the definition of a cult classic. It's an album that people are still listening to and talking about 7, almost 8 years later. It has that mystery ingredient that just makes it infinitely replayable over and over again. But why? First of all, I think SZA really leaned into the hip-hop and R&B elements of her music, which is something that really made sense from a marketing but also a creative perspective. While I love the sprawling, airy indie feel of her early work, I don't think Ctrl would have been as emotionally resonant and personal as it is with that sound. But finally, also, the album just matches her voice. Because SZA has so much vocal talent, I kind of feel like her producers were just not quite up to par with the potential she had on the previous few projects. But this one, the sound is there. The indie rock and soul styles are definitely still present on songs like Supermodel or 20-something.
Leave me lonely for prettier women. You know I need too much attention for shit like that. You know you wrong for shit like that. I could be your supermodel if you believe.
While she also incorporated the contemporary trap sounds for songs like Love Galore and Doves in the Wind.
Got me looking for you. I be looking for you. Got me looking forward to weekends. Sure, baby. Sure, baby. Sure, baby. Sure.
Some beats are synthetic and computerized, while others are warm and lo-fi. There's quiet and colorful strings and synths like the beats behind Drew Barrymore and Prom. The arpeggiating, muted purple synths on Garden are sparkly, feminine, and have a trap inspiration.
I need your support now. And can't you come over again? Got no pennies on. I need your support now. I know you gotta be like
Broken Clocks, Normal Girl, The Weeknd. Those tracks are a bit more traditional R&B, but still with sparkly, dancey synths and crunchy drums.
in about 2 days, no rain. Been about 3 years since I dated you. Why you still talking about me like we together? I moved on for the better. You moved on to whoever. I was down for whatever, and then some. You gon' make.
Overall, I think the best thing SZA did with this record's sound was not make it overly trendy. Most of these songs feel warm, slow, and organic. Not rough or unfinished, but not overly polished either. There's the indie alternative sensibility that SZA always had, keeping her relatable, and it also matches the confessional, diary-like lyrics and storytelling perfectly, making the album essentially feel timeless. Ctrl doesn't really sound like 2017 at all, at least to me. You go back to a lot of albums that dropped 6 years ago and you're kind of like, damn, music was a little ass back then. But Ctrl doesn't feel like that much at all because SZA really knows how to put so many styles into one project. I think that's why it's lasted so long, why it's in the top 40 of the Billboard 200 right now, and people are still listening to it today. To me, this album aged just as well as House of Balloons and Channel Orange, which I think a lot of people generally say are some of the best 2010s R&B albums overall, a cut above the rest. And honestly, personally, Ctrl is right up there with them. Of course, though, it wouldn't be a classic without SZA's voice. I could compliment SZA's amazing vocals all day, but her songwriting to me is what keeps me going back to Ctrl since I was in high school. The melodies are non-stop up and down and so easy to sing with, while her lyrics are just so honest, with SZA addressing her deepest insecurities, her failings, her flaws, her greatest desires, all within this world of jazzy singing and sweet sounds. The songwriting is just as timeless and relatable as the instrumentals. She really put her whole self out there with songs like Normal Girl, Drew Barrymore, Broken Clocks. Those hit on some real topics without ever giving up and going to sadness. Even though she discusses heartbreak and trust issues and low self-esteem, cheating, the overall feeling is still growth. When she closes the album with a song 20-something, a sample from her mother says this.
And if it's an illusion, I don't want to wake up. I'm gonna hang on to it. Because the alternative is an abyss, is just a hole, a darkness, and nothingness. Who wants that?
And those lines reveal the message behind the album, that sometimes hope is the only way forward, especially in a time of your life that can be so confusing and sometimes hopeless. Sometimes you just have to pick a lane and keep moving forward. This album reminds me that nothing is perfect and that things are always going to be crazy and confusing, but only you can take control and make your own path. That's why it stayed with me for so long. I think that's why it stayed lasting the past almost 7 years, and people will still be listening to this record when it turns 10, 15, or 20 years old. The way SZA looked for and created emotional clarity in the middle of some very confusing yet universal topics, all while admitting that despite all of her thinking, there might not just be one answer. Overall, Ctrl is pretty hard to beat. It's one of my favorite albums ever made, and it probably will be forever. But still, in just a year's time, she had gone from this kind of small indie singer who mostly had online fans to someone whose vinyl records would be found on every shelf in every Urban Outfitters. She had songs on the radio, big streaming numbers, and more. Ctrl has stayed on the Billboard 200 unbroken since the day it came out, almost 400 weeks, the true definition of a modern classic. But speaking of vinyl records, I'm actually going to be giving away this copy of SOS on my Instagram. All you have to do is go follow me over at Volksgeist when the video is over. You can like my last 3 posts, follow me, and comment on my latest post what you think I should make next. I'll pick the winner 10 days after the video goes live, and I'll post it on my story and send a DM to whoever got the record. Anyway, thanks for entering. Appreciate you guys going over and doing that, and hopefully whoever gets this really enjoys it because it's a great record. SZA's music, especially her deep cuts off her albums, perfectly capture that feeling of making you feel nostalgic and sentimental about things that you've personally never experienced. And that's what makes her fan base so dedicated and so wide-ranging. For example, because of Frank Ocean, I know what it's like to be in an emotionally distant gay relationship, even though I'll never experience that in my life. And similarly, because of SZA, I know what it's like to be an ambitious young black woman battling my insecurities and searching for love, even though I'll probably never experience that. What I'm trying to say is that it's so vivid, so well written, the storytelling is so good, it's an album you can listen to for years. It follows you through your life and you bond with it. That's why it's gotten even more popular since it dropped, literally reaching higher places on the charts than it did when it first came out. Anyway, immediately after the success of Ctrl, it seemed like SZA was in a much better place with her anxiety around releasing music. A month after the album dropped, she was quoted saying, "I have less anxiety about the things that hindered me from putting Ctrl out, so I'll probably be done with the next one in about 6 months. But then that never happened. Eventually, 1 year after Ctrl became 2, then 3, and people started to get pretty antsy. She even made a promise that her next album would be released in August of 2019, 2 years after she said it would at first, but still a reasonable timeline. But then 2019 came and went, and a new album never came. Suddenly, it was Ctrl all over again. But now, instead of a moderately small online fan base waiting impatiently, it was millions of listeners, Grammy nominations, radio success. The pressure was really on, and she was completely gone. Especially because she started talking about her next album right after Ctrl came out, saying all kinds of things about how it was going to feature Brockhampton and Justin Timberlake and Post Malone, and that she was going to drop singles, and that it was all going to happen soon. But then it just didn't, because not everything was going so smooth behind the scenes. It turns out that SZA's silence wasn't entirely her plan. Remember how I mentioned that Ctrl took 4 years to come out because she couldn't figure out what songs to include, and eventually the label just cut her off and put it out anyway? At first, a lot of people thought that made the label look bad, and maybe in a way it does, but even she kind of went with it. After it came out, she said, "This time I'm less anxious and I'm ready," and even in 2017 she was saying 6 more months and I'm ready for the next album. But by the time 2020 started, years later, even while she was publicly saying stuff like it's coming soon and this next album is going to be me less afraid of who I am, it wasn't long before she just straight up said that her label wouldn't let her drop the album and that things were getting hostile between her and her managers behind the scenes. But eventually she backtracked again and said sometimes no is a blessing and I trust the people around me. Essentially, SZA might be great at making music, but she might not be as good at sequencing an album, figuring out what to include, what to cut, figuring out how to build a record itself. 2 times in a row, she's had her albums delayed by 4 or 5 years from when she first announced them. And while you could look at the label and ask why they keep getting pushed back, you could also look at her creative anxiety as a source of delays for these projects, because it would still be another 2.5 years before more SZA music. Eventually, at the start of 2022, she announced that the album was being finished in Hawaii and that she was going to drop it in the summertime. But still, another summer since Ctrl, the 5th year, came and went with no new album. Good Days, which was supposed to be the first single for SOS, was already 2 years old at that point, and SZA was saying in interviews that she was too stressed for fame and hadn't even come close to finishing the album at all. This is a pretty confusing timeline. I mean, it's like, I'm not gonna lay it all out and make sense of it, but basically SOS finally dropped in December of 2022 after 5.5 years since her last project. Countless delays, setbacks, rumors, false starts, but to me, it's a modern masterpiece. It's not even a question of whether or not it was worth the wait. I'd have waited 10 years if I knew this is what we were getting. Very few albums that have come out in the last few years I just keep listening to and getting more and more attached to as time goes on. But SOS really proved that SZA truly knows music. I can't even sit here and say the best part of SOS was this or that because there's so much going on in that record. It isn't one thing that just made it work. It was so much. And the success of SOS also was on the next level for SZA. I mean, even more than that, the sustained success. This album has been like in or close to the top 10 of the Billboard 200 for like 2 years. It's above Taylor Swift, it's above Kendrick Lamar, recent albums that were hugely successful, and SZA's SOS is beating all of them. It's truly making a mark. I think at first some of her hardcore fans didn't love it. Some people said it was too long or too bland or whatever, but personally I think SOS is a masterpiece and it made SZA a superstar. It was her first #1 album, but even more than that, it was a real #1 album. SZA has stayed one of the most popular records around for 2 years. Being radio friendly and having a narrative that stuck with people with a wide range of beautiful sounds held together by a motif of aquatic oceanic beauty, it's on a different level. But what made it so good? Why has it been one of the most popular albums out for like 2 years straight? SOS is just a wide album. The production, the songwriting, the soundscape itself. SZA made this long record, but it's not long for no reason. She put so much into the project, it feels like it took 5 years to make. There are hits, deep cuts, and it's all tied together by this loose feeling of expansive blue. And so what is SOS about? To me, it's simple. It's SZA's experience of coming to terms with her life, coming to terms with the fact that she's famous and that there are millions of eyes on her, but also with the fact that in spite of all of that, she's still not that important, that things still aren't and might just never be perfect. The cover for SOS shows SZA sitting alone on a long diving board against a backdrop of endless ocean. And it's a 1-to-1 recreation of a famous photo of Princess Diana taken on a yacht in the 90s, kind of obviously meant to represent SZA's state of mind, comparing her to Princess Diana, someone who despite being loved all over the world, suffered deep personal issues that eventually destroyed her life. In the words of SZA, she said, "I love how isolated she felt." In that way, the album cover and the album itself goes on to explore the ideas of still suffering and still being lost in the midst of fame and praise from other people. Talking about the stress behind releasing SOS, she said, "To be expected to do anything at such a high level is crazy. That isn't meant for a person, it's meant for a machine." She also said, "I like to create, write, and sing, and I like to share. But I don't know if chasing after superstardom or whatever I'm doing right now is sustainable for me. But I will take a good swing at it and give it my best." But it just so happens that SZA's best was really good. SOS is an incredibly cohesive album. Even though she's kind of left behind the more obscure niche sounds for a more poppy tone, it still feels interesting. It's the kind of album you can listen to all the way through with no skips, even though it has 23 songs. Throughout the project, the songs feel light, airy, acoustic, and blue. And it's just a great album experience to sit back and listen to. Songs like Low, Blind, Snooze, Gone Girl, Ghost in the Machine, Nobody Gets Me, Special, Too Late, Open Arms, Good Days. These songs have just the most tranquil, peaceful instrumentals I've heard in a long time. At the same time, the other half of the album is full of a bunch of different styles, from the grungy punk song F2F to the boastful rapping on SOS, the pop sounds of Kill Bill, Seek and Destroy, the boom bap Forgiveless, the melodic trap of Used, Shirt. The album almost has two sides, one big and loud, radio ready, and one peaceful and quiet. To me, they're both great. Some of the songs on SOS are really peaceful, music I could fall asleep to, and I mean that in a good way. But one side is memorable and catchy, and it's no wonder SOS has sold insanely well. I think that's why it's not boring, even though it's 23 tracks long. Given that the songs kind of alternate between energy, it almost ebbs and flows like waves on a beach, keeping you entertained the whole time. And critics got that too. SZA finally won 3 Grammys at the 2024 Grammys, and she beat Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, and Lana Del Rey to win International Artist of the Year at the Brit Awards, performing 4 sold-out shows in a row at the biggest venue in the UK at that same week. To me, the story that SZA tells on SOS is almost the opposite of her last album. Whereas Ctrl was about taking control of her life, SOS is this distress signal because it turns out that life just isn't all that simple. With the album's lyrical standouts coming from lines like, "Now that I've destroyed everything, I'm so free," or "I'd rather be in hell than alone," or "I don't want righteousness, I hurt too much, I lost too much." SZA paints a picture of finding beauty in distress or loneliness or loss or pain. The album is a mixed bag, mostly because it feels so spontaneous and real. It's not a narrative concept album really, but it still kind of feels like one the way that she goes in circles with herself. Sometimes she's the hero, sometimes she's the villain, sometimes she's rejecting someone, sometimes she's missing someone, but most of all, she's just uncertain. She doesn't know what to believe, but she's looking hard. On a song like Good Days, she even finds a beautiful existential break from the uncertainty by reminding herself, half of us laying waste to our youth, it's in the present. SOS is a long album. It's a beautiful musical journey that I've been listening to on repeat for the past 3 years, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. More than anything, it reminds me artistically, philosophically, to appreciate what I have and to be okay with what I don't. Many artists, especially after a really successful album like SOS, will release a deluxe reissue with new songs that helps the album chart again, brings it back to people's attention, and just doubles down on how big the project already was. Most artists, though, would be doing this about 3 to 6 months to maybe a year after their album comes out. And SOS SOS did announce the deluxe for SOS titled Lana just a couple weeks after it dropped, but again, the story goes that she made over 100 songs for this project, and over the span of a couple of years, it basically became an album on its own, with SZA still working on it just a few hours before it was released, and even on its year-late release date, it was released the next morning after it was supposed to come out, not at the promised midnight music industry typical time schedule that it was announced on. When it finally did drop in December of 2024, though, literally 2 years after SOS and after countless delays and rumors, SZA dropped essentially an entirely new project with 15 new songs, some of which had been previously leaked or posted to SoundCloud, but many of which were entirely new. All in all, Lana is essentially her third album. Thematically though, Lana was significantly different from SOS. SOS is an album about someone practically crumbling under the pressure of all the attention around her. I mean, SZA literally compares herself to Princess Diana on the cover art. It isn't a happy album. But Lana is different. SZA said this just a month before the project was released.
I think I'm making music from a more beautiful place, from a more possible place, versus a more angsty place, she says. I'm not identifying with my brokenness. It's not my identity. It's shit that happened to me. Yeah, I experienced cruelty, but I have to put it down at some point. Piece by piece, my music is shifting because of that, and I'm getting lighter.
And when you listen to Lana, you can hear that change in her mindset and emotion. The music is full of light, airy vocals and muted, dreamy beats, but the way she's presenting her typical stories of self-love, personal growth, crashing out, falling for people, it's just different this time around. That's what makes it a new album. It's not anxious, fearful, and negative. Instead, she sounds more free and happier than ever before. Songs like Kitchen, Drive, Chill Baby, they're all gentle and ethereal.
Baby, the pressure just made me too soft. 'Cause all I seem to do is get in my way, then blame you with.
The intro track feels like it's inspired by an 80s Japanese ambient album more than anything else.
Don't care what it costs me. I'll trade anything to feel now. Searching for real, trying for real, failing for real, lost in the real.
During interviews from this time, SZA's family shared stories about how much they've come to love her music after not supporting her creative aspirations when she was first getting started, whether it was due to religion or just plain wanting what was best for their lost college dropout daughter. Her dad said this to British Vogue.
Every time I hear the song Blind, it brings tears to my eyes. Whatever she puts her mind to, she succeeds at it. Early on, I saw that, but I had no idea it would get to this point, or at this level, at this capacity, and this magnitude. It surprised all of us.
Even the name of her latest project is a very personal reference from SZA's life. It's technically named after her. It comes out of a story from her childhood where she had gotten her name, Solana, tattooed on herself at the age of 13. But with each letter of the tattoo costing $10 and her only having $40 to spend, they shortened her name to just Lana, and the nickname ended up sticking for many years. It's the most authentic album she's made yet. But still though, SZA is SZA. Just a week after dropping Lana, she tweeted out that she no longer wanted to play the music game at all. She said, "To fulfill my last 2 album requirements, I think I just want to make peaceful children's music and get out of here, then go be a farmer and donate the produce to underserved communities." Even while releasing her more authentic and happiest music of her career, and probably being a top 3 most famous female vocalist right now, she still doesn't really want to be in the middle of all of it. That applies to everything about her: her refusal to fall into one genre of music, her relationship with religion that she shares openly, the emotional palette of her songs, her acknowledgement that life is never black and white, and openness about the confusion and the back and forth of searching for meaning and success. It's all different from typical pop narratives, and I think that comes from exactly what we talked about in this video. She never intended to get as big as she has. SZA has technically only put out 2 studio albums in her 12-year career. It takes her half a decade to put together a project. When she first came out, she was hanging around with cool indie R&B and hip-hop artists, saying that she wanted to dress like a Wes Anderson character, making songs that sounded more like something from an indie movie soundtrack than R&B hits, and talking about organic chapstick in interviews. She literally went to college for marine biology. She didn't listen to music as a kid. Her music and its success is the product of raw inspiration and talent, not manufactured listenability. She has literally said before that the music industry is a stressful, psychosis-inducing industry. Most people who are at the top of something like that would never. One day she says she wants to quit music. The next she drops a classic album that breaks records. That's the struggle she's always dealt with, not being sure of herself. It's something everyone deals with, especially someone who became one of the biggest stars alive without wanting to, but instead feeling like she just had to because the ideas kept coming. Even something as simple as getting a BBL. Getting a BBL has been one of the biggest women's beauty trends for the last decade, but SZA has talked many times about how she immediately regretted it after she got one, realizing that it didn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things, saying, "I'm so mad I did that" when talking about it later.
SZA recently said, "Every day I grapple with, am I done with music? Maybe I'm just not meant to be famous. I'm crashing and burning and behaving erratically. It's not for me because I have so much anxiety. But why would God put me in this position if I wasn't supposed to be doing this? So I just try to keep rising to the occasion."
There's one article where Kendrick Lamar was talking about SZA, and he said something that I think perfectly sums up what makes her such a great singer.
He said, "Her vulnerability through her music is brave and inspiring because she's a reminder of what the human experience looks like, a roller coaster of emotions, and that's okay. We are alive."
One day she might tease new music and then say right after that she wants to retire from music for good. Even though she's become the face of modern R&B, the biggest R&B artist of the decade so far by every metric, she still doesn't seem entirely happy with everything she's achieved. But that's authentic. That's not someone who drops album after album, moving their career forward like a billion-dollar corporation. That's a person whose creativity is appreciated by millions through all of the never-ending ups and downs. But the most amazing thing about SZA as an artist is that she always keeps moving forward and embraces the fear to create something new. From starting as a small indie artist to releasing arguably the most successful female R&B album in 35 years, her entire lifetime, she's always kept going despite the voice in her head that tells her to stop. To me, that's what SZA is all about, since it reflects in her life story too. And it's something we can all learn from her. You only fail when you give up. Until then, you just keep moving forward. Until then, nothing else matters. Not to say though that this method will be easy, but actually that if you can embrace the moments where nothing is certain and everything seems doomed to fail when everyone is against you, if you can weather that storm, you can make it to wherever else you could possibly want to go. And that's something I always want to remind everybody watching these videos. Every artist, rapper, singer, photographer, writer, videographer, content creator, you have to keep going. There's no other way to make it. And that's also the meaning behind Chaos, the solid silver hand-painted pendant that I designed and I'm wearing right now. It's from my new brand Spirit World, and this vibrant character tells a story about pushing forward. It represents the journey of an artist, the student, the entrepreneur, looking for success and finding their own path. Chaos represents the idea of working to achieve your goals even when it feels impossible to keep going, because that's when it matters the most. Creativity and art, it's not supposed to be easy, and meaningful art doesn't get made without real work behind it. We're all sitting here watching videos about successful artists, people who change the world, and I want to motivate all of you to pursue your dreams and never give up. In fact, for a lot of people, accepting that things can get pretty chaotic is often the key to accepting the success that's coming your way, and not accidentally missing it when it shows up. The only thing crazier than chasing your dreams is not chasing them. Chaos is my experiment with fashion. It's my emblem of that story, trying to create a figure that reminds us all of what we're capable of and giving us the strength to get there, while on my own journey as well. It's the same story with The Darkest Night and the Brightest Day, our best-selling pendant about the persistence and determination, showing a vibrant sun rising over a night full of silver stars, that's finally back in stock after 6 months of being sold out. Spirit World can go where you go and remind you to let yourself dream big the way you deserve to. It's high-quality, solid silver, hand-painted jewelry, only the best because I don't want to create some stupid little merch product. I want to make something real, that's well-designed, feels good, and actually has value. So if you want to support my new brand and invest in a piece of high-quality silver jewelry, go to spiritworld.store and get the new pieces now. And as always, shipping is completely free in the US, and spiritworld.store is the only place you can take advantage of our buy one get one half off bundle deal. Again, that's spiritworld.store for free shipping in the US and a buy one get one half off bundle deal only for our new pieces, Chaos and Harmony. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.